Well, exactly. But anyway, and we're very grateful of Adrià Alsina coming to moderate the debate. He's recently appointed press officer of Assemblea Nacional de Catalonia, and very rightful because he's an excellent communicator, and I think he will show you all his skills. So Adrià Alsina,
So anyway, thank you very much for being here. Again, tonight our future in Catalonia takes place in a bunker. We'll explain the reasons later on. With a couple of beers, it's much easier to explain. But what I'm really happy to be here tonight because we got a fantastic trident here of great. I don't know if it's by coincidence or not. Nowadays, you never know whether it's by coincidence or not that people are women or men. But we got like the fantastic trident of Football Club Barcelona here. You know, Stanic, Schreiber, Castro. I don't know who will score first. But Anna Stanic comes right from London, although she's from Slovenia. If I'm right here. She's a lawyer. And she's been working with the governments of Croatia, Slovenia, and other nations. And nowadays she's more of an expert in energy and the European Union. Second, we've got Krystyna Schreiber. You can see today she was featured on the cover of the Esquire magazine. Well, it's not the Esquire, but it sort of sounds like the Esquire magazine. It's the Esquire. Very Catalan word, although it does sound like the Esquire magazine. Really nice cover over there. Krystyna is German-born. She's been working in communication for a long time. She's written a couple books about Catalonia, especially aimed at German audiences. She just published her last book. So if you're a German speaker and you don't know what to give to your relatives in Germany, please just come here and buy her book. Well, come here or go to Amazon.com or whatever. Yeah. No, Amazon.
Yeah.
They have it? Yeah. Amazon pays for the beers now. All right. And third, we've got Liz Castro. Liz Castro is an American-born publisher, although she's been living here for quite a long time already. She's published a number of books about Catalonia, also aimed at English-speaking audiences. She just published another book as well. Again, you can buy it on Amazon as well. It's already on Amazon because last time I tried it was not on Amazon. So, it's called Many Grains of Sand. A bit of the history of the Catalan process, which starts being a bit long already. But you know, it's always good to remember where it started, how it started, and how it goes piece by piece, until we get 1 million people on the street. Anyway, it's really good that we got these three fantastic people here that can comment on how the international media, how international governments see the process, see Catalan independence from abroad. And we'll be also expecting some questions from you from here in the audience. But to begin with, well, you know, we're going to have a beer later on. So I had part of my beer first. You know what happens when the pint is over there? You never know whether it's half full or half empty. And I do believe that among the audience, if you're here, basically, it's because you might be wondering as well whether it's half full, it's half empty. Is Catalonia considered as a nation, as an entity that deserves independence? Are the Catalan people even considered as a people abroad? Well, that's something that we're going to be asking our panelists here. But first of all, I just wanted to tell you two very, very, very short stories that happened last week. Do you know this guy over here?
No.
He's not in the room. Huh? He's not in the room. But again, just check your cell phone, because he might have sent you an email or something basically saying that you are wrong with something that you said about Catalonia. Especially the journalists in the room. Be careful, because they do send stuff to journalists.
All right.
José Manuel García Margallo is the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Spain. And 2 weeks ago, he published this fantastic article on the ABC newspaper, a very left-wing pro-Catalan newspaper. Not quite. A very close to the Spanish government newspaper, saying, let's change the conversation. Let's forget about the Catalan problem stuff. It's just legal. You don't have to care about that. And for some reason, his own ministry, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, deemed it really cool to send it through the Spanish embassies all over the world to all the major papers in Europe and sometimes abroad as well. Because they thought this was such a powerful article that would end any doubt any European citizen or government would have about Catalonia and how Catalonia must remain in Spain. So he did, so they did. And you know what happened right after most of these newspapers received this nice letter by their local Spanish embassy? No?
They binned it.
Huh?
They binned it.
They binned it. Well, some might have binned it, but you don't really bin a letter from a minister, from a Minister of Foreign Affairs. Actually, what they did is they called us. They called us. They called the ANC, they called the Catalan government, saying, hey, we just got this article from your minister. Do you have anything to say about this? Because we would like to have the other side of the information, of the article, of the argument. And, well, many newspapers did that, and in some of them, this was the result. There was a fantastic article by Mr. Romeva, in many cases, right after Margallos. Romeva is kind of the Catalan's foreign minister, and in some even, there was this. This is the Delo newspaper from Slovenia.
Yep.
So Anna Stanic may have had something to do with this.
No, I didn't have any.
Right, then it was their own initiative.
But Delon follows Catalonia for years now.
The Delo, yeah, the Delo is a very friendly, objective newspaper. Yeah. Anyway, just check out the faces of them. I just love it. I just love it. So this is the half full. Huh? What's the half empty? Well, right after this, I was talking to a journalist, a really good friend of mine, from a country that I won't mention, but it's a country that many times we assume would instantly recognize Catalonia if should Catalonia try and become independent very soon. He said, I asked him, well, how do you see this polemic and everything? Well, I see you Catalans are doing great, it's fantastic. We feel so much at ease when we talk to you, whereas the Spanish government is so unreliable. They're always doing strange stuff. Now they're struggling with NATO as well. So it's so great to work with you guys. So I said, well, so you think your government would recognize us? And he said, no way, never, ever. Don't even try it. Well, that's the half empty part of the story. Huh? So, what do you think? Anna Stanic, do you think the beer, the pint of the Catalan recognition, the perspective, or how people abroad see Catalonia, how people see Catalonia abroad, is half full for the Catalans' interest or half empty?
Well, I think I'll have to start on a pessimistic note and I think that it's half empty still. I think the debate hasn't progressed much further in the last year or so. And a lot of it is still contained within, or there's a strong perception of the Catalan independence being driven primarily by financial interests. And financial interests are not really things that are moving people a lot abroad for many reasons, including the financial crisis. And so that perception that is what is driving the independence movement is something that many people don't understand. So you lose a lot of people on the left, and the people on the right are generally not pro-independence people, so you're losing that part of the conversation. So I think a lot, but I'm not, that's how I perceive it. I think we can change that. I don't think it's difficult to change. I think we just have to change the narrative, and I think we need to do far more stories about what Catalonia and what Catalonia in the future would look like, why it would be different, in what ways it would be different, what is the reason, what are the aspirations, what are the wishes that are driven by the interests of ordinary people, their dreams of the future, rather than it being about, is it 8% of the budget, or is it 10%, or is it 4%, or what it is. So it's more about being driven by emotion, but driven by a story of what the future is. You know, how is it different, and what is the role of Catalonia in this new future that we are all aspiring to? Because I think there is a strong movement around the world for a new way of doing things. And I think Catalonia fits, at least in my view, and that's why I've moved here, fits strongly in that narrative, but it's not being expressed in that way. So I think we can do far more on that. So concentrate less on op-eds. I think they're very important and those are very powerful, but concentrate more on stories of the future and what that is. And, you know, and that then explains the multiculturalism, that explains why people who are foreigners that live here are supportive of the independence movement. It shows that it's a movement about the future, not about the past. I mean, the past is important, but it's about what the future brings. And that's why I'm optimistic that we can change it, but I think we're still in the half-empty phase.
So bottom line is, Mr. Romeva should throw in some future in that point. No? All right. What's your take, Krystyna Schreiber?
Well, I have to...
More Germanic point of view.
Yes. I have to say that in the case of Germany, there has been a considerable evolution in the perception of the Catalan process, especially considering that Germany is a country that is especially skeptical with any kind of secessionism, anything that has to do with separation, with any change within the European Union. For many reasons, especially historical reasons as well. We have difficulties with words like nationalism. There is a lot of, still not, it's very well known that even though here is a division, this is decentralization, it's not completely understood yet that it's not comparable with federalism, for example, in Germany. So there's still many aspects that are not known enough to understand exactly the situation of Catalonia within the Spanish state and to understand the specific relationship that the central government in Madrid has with the different community autonomies, and especially with Catalonia. But on the other hand, I do see, in a way, the glass half full, precisely because since Germany is such a difficult audience, the German audience is such a difficult audience, it's very interesting to observe that we have moved from a completely, I mean, there wasn't even any interest in what's going on in Catalonia. It was just, they were just speaking about Scotland. That was very interesting, but hardly any articles about Catalonia in 2012, 2013. And then slowly interest started, and it was precisely, as you say, the typical reasons were, it was a financial discussion, this was just a phenomenon of the economic crisis, this is egoism of the rich regions that don't want to share with the poor ones in times of crisis. And then, of course, the fact that in the beginning the discourse was the Catalan discourse was very much focused on we are a nation, we have a right to decide, but as well it used a lot the words of nationalism. Of course, right away in Germany, everybody was scared of, like, wow, that's, you know, a Eurosceptic movement, and this is dangerous for the European project. And this has started to change. There's a lot more variety in the public opinion. There have been many journalists who have come the last years as well to Catalonia to inform themselves personally. And there have been as well many articles from them and from experts who have offered a different vision of the Catalan movement. They have offered a vision that this is as well has other reasons. This movement starts to pick up with the statute, that there might be a democratic conflict. So it's starting to change, and as well there are more voices now that respect the wish of the Catalans to have a referendum. They do say on the other side, and this is something important as well, in Germany we're very legalists, we're very focused on legal context. So, and we as well have a lot of respect to our towards our constitutional court, because for us it works very well, we really think it's neutral. So if a constitutional court in another European country that we consider state of the European Union and democratic says that something is illegal in the first place, well, German thinks, so well, so you just adapt, because obviously it's not possible. But this is starting to change, and there are more and more even journalists and also experts and politicians that say, well, there might be, it might be different, and there might be really another problem behind all this, and it's not just a financial question. So what is clear, what has to be improved, is to explain more that this is a democratic conflict, because this is something that in Germany works well, the German people can understand well, and precisely because we are so much pushing for the European project, to see that there's other people who are very European oriented, that want to take in immigrants, that want to demonstrate that they can reach independence in a pacific and democratic way, and that they're trying just to vote, to decide. This is something that the German people, I think, they can understand. But this message has not arrived yet sufficiently. I mean, clearly there is still the other side, which easily says, well, this is just a financial dispute, and in the moment you have another solution, you have a financial pact or something, this is all going to die down. But it's becoming less. So I think that in terms of Germany, we can say that the glass is maybe almost half full. And I also want to add something to what you said about the idea to open the doors to, well, this can cause changes in the European Union. This is something that as well has come up in the German press. There have been some articles and also some experts I interviewed that they say, well, actually, this movement is interesting for Europe because it can open a little bit the door to the Europe of the citizens, to a Europe that we as citizens imagine more than the Europe that is like just the Europe of states and just institutions, and there's a lot of distance. So in this sense, the Catalan movement as well provokes a lot of, I would say, almost a certain fascination in some terms, because people are starting to get interested in, wow, this is interesting what's happening there. You know, people go to the street, they're very organized, and more than 1 million over and over. So there's something happening. They're taking, so to say, the future in their own hands, and this is something that maybe we would like to do too, that in a way it's something that we need in Europe. So this kind of feeling as well is being transmitted, and it's starting to be, there starts to be a reception for this kind of citizens taking things in their own hand in a very pacific and democratic way.
So basically, you assume then it's almost half full.
I mean, I'm optimist always, so I can. And I'm also looking into where you started at, you know, where are you today? So it would, I mean, of course we can always, as a German, we always say there's always work to do, and of course it could be easily half empty, but you've come a long way in a very short time. 4 years ago, people didn't know what was the difference between Spain and Catalonia. I remember there was the sentence like, Scots have kills, what do Catalans have? Nobody knew what Catalans had. And nowadays people even make videos on the Castellers, and I mean, it's amazing what...
Liz, so what's your take? There's a tie here between half empty, half full. You got it.
Well, the way I see it is, just a few years ago, there were a couple of drops in the glass. And, you know, as Krystyna said, nobody knew what Catalonia was, nobody had any idea. The only articles that ever came out in the press talked about food, talked about football, and talked about beaches. And that was it. It was tourism, it was, you know, and all of a sudden, thanks to really this very interesting citizen-led, strictly democratic, strictly peaceful movement, we have attracted an incredible number of journalists to come, and politicians, and people who are interested in this. You know, there are movements like this all over the world right now. There's Black Lives Matter in the United States, there's Occupy, there's the Indignados, there's even the campaigns of Bernie Sanders and Jeremy Corbyn have this feeling of, there's this system going on, there are these people who are pulling strings, who are controlling the world, and we want to take back some of that power. We don't necessarily want to take over the parliament, we don't want to burn it down, but we want to take back some of the power. We want to, it's a democratic movement. It's a movement that stresses the importance of democracy and the voice of the people. And I think that Catalans that the process towards independence is a manifestation of this desire to say, what Catalans want, and to make sure that that voice is heard in the parliament. And so I think that in that sense, this movement has really resonated with peoples in other parts of the world who say, you know, wow, these Catalans aren't just getting jacked around, they're getting people to listen. They've gone from, I forget how many members of parliament who were pro-independence, say 5 years ago, to a majority in the parliament now. And how they've done it with this incredibly organized, citizen-led, peaceful, non-violent demonstrations and all sorts of other things, candle lighting and mosaics made out of umbrellas and crazy things, you know, going to Brussels to demonstrate and organizing from the ground up, because it really is, that's actually true, that this movement comes from people who said, the politicians aren't representing us, they're not doing what we want them to do, we're going to organize and get them to listen. And I think that's a movement that really, that resonates. And so I also think that the way that this movement has attracted attention from the world has brought people here, has brought journalists here who then need to compete about how they tell the story. They have to find an angle. And so they're learning about Catalonia. And that has expanded and has added a lot to the understanding of Catalans around the world. Each time we have a huge demonstration, and there have been quite a few in the last 6 years, really big demonstrations. We attract all this attention, people come, and they tell a new part of the story, they talk to new people, they interview, you know, a different level of politician. It's very interesting. And you can tell, if you look at the press, you know, there's a depth there that simply wasn't there before. And that's, for me, that is a very positive development.
Although I'm thinking a sentence from you. You said Catalans have done a lot of crazy things lately. However, we don't want to burn the parliament. Just in case you were here, just thinking as we are in the bunker, that we were trying to plot something to burn the parliament, you know, Guy Fawkes style. Well, we're not doing that for now.
It's one of the things that's very attractive about this movement, is this insistence on non-violence.
This insistence on non-burning.
On non-burning of the parliament, exactly. And instead on making them do what we want them to do, which is the way representative democracy is supposed to work. Mm.
It's not a, they do not represent us, it's rather, we want them to do what we want them to do. No,
well, when I say represent us, I don't only mean that they're in the parliament because we voted for them, but that they need to reflect what the populace wants. Mm. They have a democratic mandate, they need to fulfill it.
So you talked about the press. We got quite a few examples here of how the press has been talking about Catalonia in the last couple of years. And I'd like you to comment on some of these headlines and articles. The first one is a classic. It's The Economist, as they say, the paper of the 1%. They titled this, that was 2 years ago, over 2 years ago. It said "Wars and Spanish Secession," and this was a bit of this commonplace talking about how nationalism can lead to war. Nationalism leads to confrontation. So I don't know if you want to comment a bit on this, because this is a very common conception in the international press and among international audiences.
Sure.
Sorry?
I would love to comment on it.
Yeah, sure. Go for it.
So whenever you look at any article in the press, particularly international press, you have to see who their audience is. And the audience of The Economist are, you know, yes, this 1%, but also people very focused on economics and on economic systems, and also on that defend generally the status quo. They would like things to remain just the same all the time so that they can do whatever they want to do. And many times articles in The Economist tend towards defense of the status quo and a very conservative point of view that any kind of changing anything is always going to be for the worse. they also tend to reflect the ideas of states and the power that the state has, as opposed to some upstart like Catalonia. And The Economist has been traditionally very pessimistic and very negative about Catalonia's chances. This particular article, I remember, talked about train crash, which is an expression that's used in Catalan. It's true.
Yeah, wasn't it a mistake maybe from Catalonia to start using the train crash expression? Maybe.
Perhaps, sure. But I don't actually know who started
they all
using
say
that.
yes, it was a huge mistake.
Right, but who used
Although
it?
it's still used till today. We're still using this train crash metaphor all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Especially now the Constitutional Court is starting to investigate and indict and trial people. We're still saying we're getting to this train crash. Well, let's go to another article. Krystyna, maybe you want to illustrate us and translate this Tagesspiel article for us?
Yes.
So.
The world is a village of well-being or feeling well. So what they're kind of pointing out is what I explained before when we talk about egoism, or the idea that independence movements usually are connected to a regionalism that is just focused on yourself and on your region, that doesn't think big, that thinks small. This is all what they're saying here. And basically they're confronting the independence movement of Catalonia with the idea that actually Europe should be Europe without borders, not a Europe where we build new borders with new independences, and that so the idea in Germany is unity with diversity, but without borders. And here basically they're kind of playing with this argumentation, which I already as well mentioned, and it's very common, because it's this idea that well, I mean, they're not comparing with the Liga Nord, but they're comparing with other movements, that straight away secessionism means that you just want independence for yourself, you don't want to share with anybody, you want to build up borders, and it's against the European project. It's a sign that these people think only in themselves, they think small. Yeah,
even the picture is really interesting. You probably can't see the lines here.
Yes, and they say a referendum in the East Ukraine. This as well was now not anymore, but of course this was as well a problem, that whenever any kind of conflict, armed conflict comes up or came up, this is not happening anymore, but it happened when is this article?
It's 2014.
2014, yeah, exactly. Straight away there were some specialists, the journalists, but also some experts that we also have to take into account, that they came, especially experts, they came from observing or accompanying the situation in the Balkans, and then they see the movement in Catalonia, and they apply the same perception to the Catalan movement without going into depth, and then it's very easy to say, oh well, this is the same. So this was as well a problem for the Catalan independence movement to distinguish from other movements that are violent or that have to do with violence. And I think that the path that has been taken to really do everything really peaceful and democratic is starting to give fruits, because it's starting to arrive that you can't throw them all into the same, the same basket. You have to look at every movement separately, and you have to study and try to understand the reasons behind it. This is something that also experts every time more expose, also in German press or in their informs, that they say, okay, we have to look at every situation separately, because if not, we're not going to be able to react accordingly to every situation, as we should in the European Union.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you.
I always get asked, okay, a lot of people know that I'm Slovenian, but they probably don't know I'm also Australian, and I'm now also British. So I quite happily, and maybe in the future I'll speak Catalan once I learn to speak it. And people tend to ask me, and it is a question I ask myself, how can someone with my background and a readiness and a desire actually to not necessarily acquire different nationalities, because I don't go around acquiring, but being exposed to different things, and being somebody who's multi-ethnic myself, and supportive of global movements and and I'm not a believer in assimilation either or anything like that. So I'm a very much someone who supports multiple identities and so on. And so they say, ask me, how is it that you support something like a Catalan movement, or how were you, why did you support Slovenian independence? And the answer to me is a simple one, and it's all about a right to be heard and a right to have a say in one's own future. And therefore, then, to me, it's not so much. It's about who are the people, what is their desire, what is it that they want to achieve. And so then it's not anymore about single identities. It is about people in a location wanting to take control of their life and make decisions. And so therefore then I see no incongruence in that at all. So therefore I don't see it as harking to the past. I see it as something about the future. So, and that's why I think, and that's how I see it. So for me, it is about the well-being, and it is not an oxymoron. It's not a conflict. It is exactly, and it is achievable. And I think that's really important in the discourse, and that's why it fits perfectly in the European project. And if we had a European Commission that was the one we ought to have, then they would understand that Europe is a place of regions. That is what the nation states were meant to reflect. And that below that, we actually have a far more complex and far richer set of backgrounds that we need to reflect, and that our politics needs to reflect, our economies need to reflect, and that one thing is global relations, and the other one is local relations, and they can all operate at the same time. They're not opposite to one another, and I think that is where we're hopefully heading, in that kind of a complex way of interrelating to each other, where I can be Slovene and at the same time live in Barcelona and work in London, and nobody should have a problem with that. And I shouldn't have to feel that I'm somehow from Mars by doing that. So that is really what I think is the aim, and that's why I feel so comfortable being here in Barcelona.
There's two really, really important things that I want to add. One is this idea that the Catalans don't feel represented right now, and so that they need a state to be able to be heard. And the second one, of course, just one right out of my head. The second one is that countries like Germany or France or Great Britain or Italy have very easily say, oh, we're not nationalist, why are you so nationalist? But none of them are giving up their borders. None of them have any intention of giving up their borders, even to the Europe that they belong to. And so it seems incongruous for them to ask another people who feels a need to be represented to do the same.
I mean, I think with Europe and probably around the world, we are suffering. I mean, as we can see also from the discourse in the United States, we are suffering from a democratic deficit. I mean, that is what the fundamental problem is. And I think the Catalan process fits, squarely into that. And it shows and it brings a spotlight on what is otherwise a phenomena around the world. And that's why it's relevant, and that's why ordinary people understand it probably deep down, and that's why the discourse about finance is just sort of confusing to the discourse, and it misses the point even in terms of the conversation with the European Union about what it is about. It is about the democratic deficit, and so it's absolutely surprising, especially with the past commission, how they approached and what their attitude was. And what we need to understand, and why I am concerned, is that yes, we now have a unique opportunity of Brexit and what that might lead to in terms of the Scottish position for a new grounds. But we also have to understand that the powers to be are even now more, they are in a bunker. I think we are increasingly going to see a commission in a bunker, and we're going to see European states, particularly that are led by right-wing parties, in a bunker. And getting them to understand what's happening here and what's happening elsewhere is not going to be easy. And that is going to be, that's part of the challenge.
So
they have to feel that we are not going to bring everything down.
I'm going to be throwing some articles at you, right? This is La Gran Época. You might have heard of this newspaper as the Epoch Times. It's a Chinese newspaper. This is the Spanish, basically Hispanic edition aimed at Latin America. And this was an article talking about the Catalan Diada, so September 11th, also a couple of years ago. I think it's 2015 or 2014. Doesn't really matter. The idea is there is a society that's divided. Pro-independence parties, pro-independence sentiment is dividing society. And then, obviously, it goes further than that. But this idea that pro-independence movements, nationalist movements divide society is a very common conception in foreign media as well, also in Spanish media and also in Catalan-based media as well. I don't know who would like to comment on this. Maybe you, Liz, you haven't yet, or Chris, you haven't commented recently.
Well, this is definitely as well one of the arguments that were seen in the German press, but I have to say that lately not so much anymore. And this was as well, the reason for this was as well because in the beginning many sources were used were unionist sources. So as well, all the things that Liz described before and that we mentioned, that journalists came from outside directly to Catalonia. They have seen the mobilizations here, they have seen transversality, they have interviewed people from different sides, and of course they write more objective articles. And this idea of a division of society, once in a while you can still read about it, but it has not really taken hold, so to say, in the press, because they have seen with their own eyes that is not true. So
the argument that there's a split in two between 50% for and 50% against, and that could lead to some sort of social unrest is still present.
Well, what is preoccupation, or what you can perceive as well in conversations with German people, especially in my experience, is that of course they would like to see, or they would like to feel secure that if there is a declaration of independence, or if there are clear steps in the direction of independence, that there was a wide majority behind it. There was a big social majority behind it. This is something that definitely is important, because they of course think of other situations that maybe then independence was not finally that easy. So this is something that definitely would be good to communicate as well, and has to be worked obviously by the independent movement here as well in Catalonia to make wider the base, the support, and to communicate as well that this is being done. That, for example, there is now one of the representatives in the Congress for Esquerra Republicana is Spanish speaking. He's from a Spanish immigration family. So all these things they count, and the truth is that this has not so much arrived outside.
But there's also the subtext to this question. Oh, it creates division. What does that mean? It means, one, is there going to be some kind of armed conflict? Is it going to be sustained for a long period of time? Is this going to create instability for me living in Germany, France, the United States, wherever? Does that mean, does there being conflict mean that, there's going to be unrest? That some people aren't going to be satisfied with the result? So what does it mean that there's this division? And how do we solve division? How do you, if there's division, which there is, in every part of society, do we all agree on football teams? Do we all agree on how our children should be educated? Do we all agree on who should be the next president of the United States? Do we all agree on the flavor of ice cream? Of course not. So what do? We resort to democratic processes, and we have a free press, and we have strong education so that people can make an informed choice, and then we let them vote. And I think that as long as the Catalan independence movement is putting emphasis on how we resolve a question that perhaps we have different opinions about, that can soothe people who may be worried about how this is going to play out. I also think that newspapers, one of their objectives at least is to sell newspapers, and oftentimes that means making things look more dire than really they are.
So let's go to the United States.
Oh, Fox News.
This, yeah.
It's not counting Fox News.
So,
Seriously?
a very, as they themselves call it, fair and balanced.
They're the only ones who call themselves that.
Sorry?
I said they're the only ones who call themselves that.
Yes. So if they call themselves fair and balanced, let's see what they have to say. Basically, you don't really need to read it all, but there's sort of a bounce in the idea that whatever it happens, if Catalonia gets independence, Catalonia will be instantly kicked out of the European Union, and that sort of anneases the corporate community, banking community, and this is an argument that is there. I mean, especially, you were saying before, in Germany there's a very legalist sort of debate, and this idea that if Catalonia gets independence, no matter what, it'll be kicked out, which has been also promoted by the Spanish state a lot, it is out there. So, do you want to comment? Maybe Anna, you are the legal expert here.
Well, I mean, there's actually no law on this point, so you can't be a legal expert on it in the sense that the European Treaty doesn't actually have any provision on this. I mean, the provision on the withdrawal is of a state, which is Article 49 and Article 50, which is what we're dealing with now with Brexit. So there's no provision that deals with what happens if a state, and I would argue and I've argued for a long time that Catalonia needs to change the discourse and not argue that it's a question of secession, but it's a question of independence and the dissolution of the Spanish state. And that's really what I would say. So there's nothing in the treaty, the European treaty, that deals with the situation. So there's nothing that you can point to and say that would be the consequence. Of course, if you turn the argument to as I've said, in terms of dissolution, then the reality would be that whatever argument would be valid for Catalonia would be valid for the rest of Spain. So if Spain is to insist that Catalonia would be out, then so would Spain. And so that has been very much an answer that I've been giving the Commission for a long time. You'll either have them both in or they'll be both out, but you can't have one of the other. So yeah, I think it's a lot of that is again something that should be done far more to promote that view, and we should develop that narrative much more also from a historical and legal point of view. There are many ways in which it can, case of Spain is a case of dissolution, not of secession, from a law point of view. And so yeah, so I think we should be able to change that narrative. And of course, just as a point of history, we had in Slovenia our referendum on independence, and we had an 88% vote in favor of the 94% of the people who actually took part in the referendum. So it's a very high participation and a very high outcome. And of course we have a completely different ethnical background. We have 90% of the people who declare themselves Sloven and a very small percentage of people who are not. So it's a different situation. Of course we had an impending war, so completely different circumstances. And despite all of that, and despite the clear evidence of support of the people, and despite the fact that our constitution actually allowed for secession or self-determination, so we had all these sort of things that we could tick the box, and yet the European Union representatives came to us 3 days before the proclamation of independence in June of 1991 and said, you will never be recognized and you will never be members of the European Union. So, you know, I don't...
Which you obviously weren't. you are in outer space.
Yes.
Like also Mr. Margallo said at some point.
Exactly. So I don't really give much credence to these kind of articles.
Alright, so just going to be throwing a couple more at you and then we'll open the room from the floor for questions. This is an article from Mexico, from a Mexican paper by this guy, Alberto Peláez, in 24 hours. Basically says the persistence of pro-independence Catalans. I'm especially lining this sentence over there, which is the financial thing. Not only the financial thing, but by saying Catalonia is not the only community that gives. There's many other regions in Spain that also give a lot to the common box or to the common good, so that other regions that are less rich, that are less favored, can also live well and can also have good standards of life. So basically, Catalans, bottom line, Catalans are so self-centered, they can only think of themselves, this is only about money. What do you say about this?
That was the mistake in the beginning in the discourse that was that came out, so to say, from Catalan Independence. That in the beginning it was a lot about this. There was a lot of talk of the financial deficit and of the conflict about the money with Madrid, and it really has taken work in countries like Germany to get away from this idea and to focus more on what we said before, that this is a democratic conflict and that actually the independentism is an answer to a political failure of the state to integrate the different parts of himself, to recognize his plurinationality and to recognize the different necessities within the state. And this is the work that has been done the last years, and it has improved. But still, of course, is an argument that is easy, comes at hand easy. And there's also an interview I made with one expert in federalism as well in press, and how the process is perceived in press as well in Germany. And it was interesting that he said, well, of course, the journalists, they have very little time to make an article. And they have to be quick, and it has to be something catching or something that you give the audience that the audience already knows about, that can easily connect to. And so it's much easier to just, well, take the typical argument and work with that than to make an investigation, even to get the tickets paid, to go to Catalonia, to make interviews, local interviews. That's very difficult. I mean, there are many other questions on the table, especially in, which country is this? Mexico. So, I mean, who cares in Mexico about what's going on in Catalonia? So it's much easier to write these few lines, I don't know how long is the article, reasoning with a financial argument, because it's very easy, and it's something that actually happens in some secessionist movements in Europe. So again, we're, what I said in the beginning, in this comparison, it's so easy to just compare and throw it all into the same.
Well, this is a very, very recent one. Well, this is Gulf News, not because it's a super influential newspaper, but because it comes with a very clear argument in favor of status quo. Basically, this is status quo is good. And it also comes down to this idea that, well, we don't want an instability. We have enough conflicts in the world already. There's Syria, there's Crimea, there's Russia, there's so many things going on at the same time. There's Brexit, and this argument, there's an argument to be made in favor of status quo, unless you are in the midst of war. It comes down to, hey, you're not doing that bad. I mean, you still are part of Europe. There is an argument there to be made in favor of just be quiet.
Yes, I mean, I think that it's true that the argument of protect the status quo, any kind of change is bad, is very prevalent. But I also think it's interesting that you had to go to the Gulf News to find this article, because I think really the message coming from Catalonia in major newspapers, you know, talking The Guardian and The Telegraph, and the Le Monde even had the very positive article very recently about the democratic process going on in Catalonia. And so I kind of think it's really easy for some country that's not very close to or familiar with this process to say, oh, you guys, you know, you're just complaining, you're just selfish, you're just whatever. But I'm not sure how much traction they're really getting, and how much credibility they have.
In this case, it also shows, and you're right on something. I had to go and look for the Gulf News to find something as clear as this, whereas in 2014, it was really easy to find this sort of articles.
Absolutely.
As the Economist one that we saw at the beginning was on the same line.
One thing that I've noticed in international press for a really long time is that always at the very end of the article, particularly in AP articles and AFP and in the agency articles, is that at the end it always says something to the effect of, you know, in the recent polls, you know, it's very divided, or there's more people that say that they don't want independence. And since September 27th last year, they've done that less and less and less and less. And in fact, when the AP on September 28th last year said, you know, 49% in favor or 48% in favor, and then didn't mention the rest, I called them up and I said, you have to say the 39%, and they did. So there's more of a willingness to recognize that this is a movement that's not going away, and that they really have to pay attention to the fact that there is a majority here who wants this to change, and it's not just a upstart movement of crazy people. It's people who are determined to have their voices heard, and they're doing it in this incredible, ground-up, democratic, nonviolent way.
We're not crazy people, but we do crazy things.
It's true. It's, you know, it's paradoxical.
Quoting yours. Coming to an end. This is actually a very positive article, but it's not the positiveness of it, but rather, where does it come from? I don't know if you probably know, Sputnik is the new name for the Voice of Russia. The Voice of Russia used to be the main international outlet of the Russian Federation, of the Kremlin. So, this is a different sort of reporting. When you, Russia has been treating Catalonia's movement very well, and this is not free.
Not at all.
I would say Russia has a clear interest in showing that Western Europe is such a mess that places like Catalonia want to get out as quickly as possible, and they end up saying that Catalonia would recognize Crimea as Russian. So, what's your take on this? Is there any mistake that Catalonia has been doing so that it can be associated like this by the Russian media or some Russian media outlets to begin with?
You know, there have been overtures from people in Russia to Catalan Independence. There have been invitations to go and speak at pro-independence or pro-secession conferences, and mostly Catalan activists have been wise enough to pass those invitations by, not all of them. So I think that's important. Second, there definitely is a desire by some Russian media to be not only Russian, but there's also Iranian. There's also there's a
Press
number
TV,
of
Press TV from
Press
Iran,
TV.
and Ispan TV as well.
Exactly.
And
There's
Venezuela from Venezuela.
right
That's a bit of the axis of
of sort
so-called
of
Catalan friends in the media.
yes.
And unwanted Catalan friends in the media.
Well, unwanted or people who have ulterior motives. And you know, everybody has their ulterior motives, everybody has their motivation. We do, they do, and so do the states in Europe who want to see the status quo. So I think it's really important to, at the very least, know what those ulterior motives are, where they're coming from, what it is they want, and be careful about being naive when talking to them. On the one hand, you don't want to not talk to them and not give them the information because we want them to know. On the other hand, we don't want them to use us as a way of use us as a way of saying that Europe is falling apart. Because we don't have any interest in having Europe fall apart. We don't have any interest in this instability that would favor them. And then finally, what Russian media is doing on social media, what we've seen with the hacking of emails in the United States. I think we have to be very careful about how we judge different sources and how we look at social media and who's on it, and you know, to be really careful about judging the authority of the information that we follow, and using using the relationships that we have on social media as a way of validating the information that we receive, and being very careful not to just accept whatever we see.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think that Twitter especially is well, it's very easy to do a retweet of something or to do a like of something, and later you realize that whoever is making a statement was not really of interest to be connected, to connect the Catalan independence movement to this personality. For example, in Germany there was an interview with the representatives of the Alternative for Deutschland, which is the right-wing party that now is coming up and gaining votes and is a big preoccupation for Germany. And one of the leaders, she said in an interview that of course they would recognize Catalonia's independence, and of course they think that Catalans have a right to have a referendum because they're very Democrats. Because of course for them this is very great publicity. And then very fast, it was noted that on Twitter there was like a short going up, and then straight after a while it died down because people realized who those people were. So I totally agree with you that it's important to look at the sources and who says what as well.
If I can add one thing, it's really easy to be irresponsible on social media and just retweet things that look like they might be good, but it's also easy to be responsible and to go check and make sure that that source that you're sharing really is legitimate. And you can do that by knowing who you're following and developing a relationship with people and seeing all the other things that they tweet and that they share. And so I think, you know, I think Twitter is an extremely powerful tool, and I would be careful to say that Twitter is dangerous because I think that it can go both ways, and we just have to make sure that we use it the right way.
Actually, there has been a lot of, there have been also some experts I interviewed on the development of the independence process, and they said that it was amazing how Catalan society expanded through social media the process, how it has communicated through Twitter, through Facebook, through all the social media. It's really amazing how the information has been spread in a very interesting, a very active, a very creative way. So it's a very good tool, and it's something that, especially in this situation, that you don't have a state behind, that you don't have the megafonia, so to say, behind you, that you have to do all the work yourself. And the few resources, the use of the sources that are available, this use has been made very well. So this is something that as well is being noticed outside.
There's Mexico City. When you're arriving from the airport?
When is that?
It was 3 years ago. Yeah, it's recent, not that recent.
2 years ago.
Huh?
2 years ago.
2 years ago. 2 years ago. Yeah, sorry. So as you were arriving in the taxi, you said, "Oh my gosh, Catalonia is over there on the sign." No? For those who don't understand this, no to bullfights, no to tauromaquia, they say there. No to bullfights. Let's follow Catalonia's example. And this comes in very handy because, well, you know how the Constitutional Court has said, well, bullfights should be allowed again in Catalonia. So when Catalonia banned, the Parliament of Catalonia banned bullfightings in Catalonia, it had a huge international attention, and now it's also opening another window of international attention. So we can either start the questions by where are we going? Is this helping Catalonia or not? What Catalonia should be doing? Or you just ask here our panelists whatever you're interested in.
Well, I personally think that the fire that's coming from Spain or Madrid directly to Catalonia based on this is seen as very one direction towards Catalonia, because before Catalonia, the Canary Islands abolished bullfighting. So they're actually concentrating in Catalonia at this moment. They're not saying anything to the Canary Islands, which is another indication of how much this conflict that they have created from September 11, 1714 until now has continued to run its path and never has stopped. As far as I'm concerned, I've just been here 20 months. I came here as an impartial person, not knowing anything about the Catalonia politics. I became informed by myself. Nobody brainwashed me, as my friends from Madrid have been saying, that Catalans have been brainwashing me. And I actually took the initiative to study the history and to learn about everything that's been going on. And all I've seen is oppression, oppression, oppression. It didn't stop in 1714, it didn't stop in 1788, or any of the other decades. It's still going today. As far as 2006 goes, the Madrid community was actually doing commercials to boycott Catalan products. This is only 10 years ago. And now they're still showing their hatefulness towards Catalonia, and they're actually, and I can't think of any other word except for that word right now, because when you actually have two parts of your country that have abolished bullfighting, and you're only singling out one part of that country and not the other one, you're doing nothing about the other one, that shows how much, what is it, of a hatefulness you have towards that region. And I've seen my friends who are Catalan that have told me, oh, we're not in Catalonia anymore, I cannot speak Catalan, because if I speak Catalan, they will actually look at me and treat me differently. That, and many of those other reasons, are the reasons that I think we need to explain to the world out there why it is that we want an independence. Because they are not treating us correctly still. And I'm sorry I'm saying us, even though I'm American. But I consider myself a Catalan now. And I actually, I think that I don't want my people, or the people that I think are other people now, to continue to suffer like this. And the thing that we need to actually show the world is not so much as how we can be in the future, but what has happened in the past and how it continues to happen now. These are the reasons why we want to be independent, because we do not have a unity with Spain. That little thing, that little picture that you had up there about Spain, Spain should be united. There's no unity when they are not treating us as a unity. So there is no unity.
All right, there was no question here, but
I may have been representing Cuba there as well. You know, I can help with the flag.
Good. So, yes, I'll be taking questions. Yeah?
Hi, thanks first to the four of you for all you do for justice in Catalonia. It strikes me that when every other day we get some perfectly reasonable law in the Catalan Parliament struck down because simply on the basis of its supposed lack of authority, and when our public officials are being all too often prosecuted or threatened with prosecution and high penalties, it seems astonishing to me if some people abroad still think it's all about economics.
Well, nobody knows about that. That's the key thing.
But that's what I'm saying, exactly. Because we have really red-letter issues here. Yeah. And it also strikes me that when legality comes into it, not to go down the line here, but when legality comes into it, as it very often does in the United States as well, in these discussions, the world needs to understand how the legality came about in Spain. There are a lot of things that undercut the authority of that legality. It's something I've been looking into very closely recently because of the book I'm writing. But, you know, the whole transition was really highly fraudulent in many ways. And Catalans are constantly having thrown in their face by Unionists and others that they voted overwhelmingly for the Constitution. Well, the guns of the army were literally pointing at them, and they had no alternative, either that Constitution or martial law. Also, they were constantly being promised, both subterraneously from Madrid and more explicitly by people like Mr. Pujol, that this was just the beginning. You know, vote for this, and then the gates of heaven will open to Catalonia. And when, under international law, as I understand it, referendums conducted under duress are not valid. And, but we're constantly having that particular referendum. I also love it when people point out the small percentage of Catalans now living who voted in that election. And laws, according to what we constantly hear from Madrid, are what should control all our affairs and our behavior. Leaving out the fact that laws should be made by the people themselves. And that's very much not the case. I mean, these were in dark rooms, not dark rooms, very elegant palatial rooms of a few carefully chosen
This is a bit
people.
of a dark room here. Drafting some laws here.
Nothing against dark rooms. Literally with senior generals in the next room approving every page as it was drafted. This is not the way democratic constitution, and then the people, and also of course, one of the main principles of the whole constitution is to give legitimacy to the monarchy that Mr. Franco left in his will. When they themselves were doing private polls of the Spanish people and find that overwhelmingly the people wanted a republic. Therefore, they would not have a referendum. For years, Don Juan had been promising, if you'll bring me to Madrid, I will let you have a referendum on the monarchy. So a lot of people expected that. It didn't happen. And all the caste, ruling caste in Madrid is the same one now that it was then, with the same principles to protect the same privileges. And this is what the world needs to hear. Now, on the economic issue, what are we talking about when we talk about the economic issues in Catalonia? We're talking about health care, which they have explicitly set out to destroy, to use their word. Education, the dangerous infrastructure. I came here on a rickety Rodalies train that I thought was going to fall apart a few times. Go to Madrid, state-of-the-art, if empty, shiny trains. And Catalans are paying for those, not to mention all these pharaonic, that wonderful phrase you use that I've never heard in English, the pharaohs building these awful, wasteful things. So don't you all think that
so now the question comes.
That first, it is not inhumane and selfish to talk about the economy, especially when bankers and the financial world is not so keen on it. It's the normal people, the ordinary people, the small business people who have an economic stake in independence. And
Can we
don't you think?
Okay.
That's a leading question.
and try and keep questions a bit shorter. I don't know if you want to answer this, basically.
I'll just maybe quickly. I mean, I think part of, and I entirely agree, part of the discourse that is missing abroad is understanding the Constitutional Court decision and understanding what it meant and what has followed subsequently. I have tried to convince people here that we translate the full Constitutional Court decision, and I understand it's 1,000 pages, and I've been told, no, Anna, why bother translating the whole thing? We'll just translate the key points. I said, that's not the point. You don't translate the key points because then nobody believes you that you've actually translated the decision correctly. You have to go through the process of translating the whole 1,000 pages without any edits and putting it out there. And then you can have discussions over it. I mean, okay, it's written in Spanish, so you think most of the world understands, but I don't understand it, many other people don't, and in order to engage into a discourse and then engage Constitutional Court people and other around the world, you need that. You need to have it out there. And with all willingness, we haven't got it. And why don't we have it? We should have it in a number of languages out there besides Spanish. And then there could be a discourse. And I agree, we need the narrative that explains what has been going on from a legal point of view. We are lacking that narrative. We are lacking a very academic, objective analysis of what has happened. Point by point, dispassionate, just telling the facts. And leaving it out there for others to interpret and others to form their own view. That is part of what you need to do in order to have people engaged. on any topic, not just on this very important topic. I think also the discourse on the economy, absolutely agree, and that is what I'm saying. This is the difference between a discourse that it's about the 80%, as opposed to discourse it's about welfare and it's about education, and this is what Catalans want, as opposed to what is being said. That is a discourse that then says it's not about not being supportive of others, not understanding the concepts of solidarity. It's actually the reverse. We understand the concept of solidarity so much more in Catalonia, and that's why we are for hospitals, education. So it's turning the discourse round. So it's not about the 8%, and it's not about convincing the bankers. And I think the part of the 8% in that was actually trying to reach out to the status quo. So it was a conversation that bankers understood and that the status quo they thought understood. But the status quo was never going to support it. So it was the wrong discourse. And I can't remember now, Jordi, you sent me that link to, I think it's a relatively recent video where a whole load of leading pro-independence movement people here have actually made a video that is only about the finance. I don't know who did it. Jordi, who? Okay, so you've got Carlos Bosch, you've got Masculé, you've got a whole load of people. There's about 15, 20 people, and it's clearly aimed at a foreign audience, and there is not a single emphasis on anything other than the finance. And that was produced, I think, this year, a few months ago, or maybe even this month. So that discourse is absolutely there. And it is a way that Catalonia, at least the establishment or whoever they are promoting this issue. And it's not, I don't think it's helpful. And I know that they are definitely wanting to help. It's not that they're not. Their heart is in the right place.
The target may not be general public.
It doesn't matter. It still doesn't. It still comes across as egoistic.
Let's not get in cross conversations here.
Yeah.
We don't want to have
there.
Oh, I think they want to say.
Ah, okay.
Okay. Well, no, whichever. No, it's fine.
Okay. I think there's a huge amount of ignorance about Spain in general. I remember in college in the 80s there was so few classes, and I went in several universities about Spain. And I think that's partly because Spain has been a decadent power for a very long time, at least up until the 80s, and doesn't really have a strong role on the world stage, and so there hasn't been a lot of people following what goes on here. And it was behind a dictatorship for 40 years. So I think a lot of people have no idea what Spain is like beyond what the beach looks like, honestly, and maybe a little bit more tourism. That has changed a little bit since 1978, but people I think people in the rest of the world look at the transition to democracy because of the story that they have been told. And I think Spain has been very successful in explaining the story of the transition from Franco to Juan Carlos, etc., the way that they wanted to. And that has been the story that's gelled, that's taken hold. And so I think that trying to expand that story is one of our, has to be one of our objectives and our main goals, to explain what Spain is really like and that what Spain's democracy is really like. And the problem that I find when I'm talking to journalists and people abroad in general is they're always using the phrase, that's just inside baseball. We can't, and inside baseball is an inside baseball term, very American, but it just means that you can't explain about all of the different political parties in Spain and have anybody have their eyes not glaze over, because it's just so complicated and there's so much backstory and it's very complex. So to find a way to explain in some kind of understandable way exactly what we're up against, I think is really important, and that's one of the things that we've been trying to do. And there are issues like bullfighting that or these court cases against people for putting out ballot boxes that are really helping us in that respect, that are making it very easy to say, these people are even crazier than us.
Yeah, I wanted to add that in Germany, this is actually quite easy to explain. If you say that there is how do you say, foundation, Francisco Franco, when you explained that there is, when there is an anniversary of Franco, that there are even official, how do you say, happenings to I don't know the English word, but to say that his memory is very important. Yes, if there's an official of the Spanish government who gives a medal to the Brigada Azul, you only have to say this kind of things, and you see that people really change the color of the face in Germany. And I remember in a debate that somebody was defending Ciutadans, because this is something that, of course, in the first place, it looks like an alternative, and they have also a very good discourse, a very intelligent discourse. And then when you say that, well, actually, when they tried to condemn Frankism in the parliament, they left as well, is very important information. So actually, this is something that in Germany is starting to arrive, this kind of messages, and it's something actually quite easy to explain. The problem is that until now it has not been explained. And as well, you can observe in the media that even journalists who are in Madrid and have been there for a long time, they're starting as well to change a bit their perception on Spain. It started with certain things with the Ley de Mordaza, the law, the gag law. Yeah, there were some journalists, they started to make like a change. It was like suddenly they started to write long articles about democracy in Spain, about how things were related with the transition. Then there was the 40th anniversary of Franco, huge articles, even books have been published. So, and even now there's...
they shot at the refugees. And
yes, exactly, the way how refugees are treated. There has been an article in a very influential magazine which has explained that one of the companies who make more profit in Europe right now with anti-human fences, and that actually have caused even a death, and is a Spanish company. So there are this kind of things are starting to come out, are starting being taken in by the press, in the public opinion, and this as well, and then the reaction like with bullfighting just kind of fits into this picture. So slowly, I think that people are realizing what Spain is like, and of course, it's definitely interesting to tell that, like I said in the beginning, that the relationship between autonomy like Catalonia and the Spanish government is not the same as we, for example, have in Germany, which is between equals. And this is very important, and people can understand it if you give a few examples. And then they can also understand the financial situation, because if you already look at it from this point of view, then you can understand that it's not about 8%, it's about keeping Catalonia like a bonsai, keeping it small, and not letting it grow, even if those decisions are absolutely against economic growth and absolutely not pragmatic, which is precisely something the Germans don't understand, you know, so.
All right, let's just keep questions and answers slightly shorter, please. You have a question there, yeah?
My first my comment is regarding the thing you said in the introduction, which was that you had been told that it was much nicer and much more pleasant to work with the Catalans, but would the Catalans be recognized? Oh, no.
With the Catalan sort of press officers and media attaches and institutions, I would say.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right, and then, but in contrast to that, the answer to
yes.
would we then be recognised? You know, and they say no. I happened to read an article about a declaration by Mr. Michael Moore, who is the ex-Minister for Scotland, who in an interview said that you get your independence, once you've got it, everyone will recognise you. So I don't think that the fact that now they say no means that in the future that will be the case. I think we have to be more optimistic and see more beer in the glass or whatever.
More beer in the glass, that's always convenient.
Now my questions to the panel. Here we're discussing how important it is for the rest of the world to know what's going on, to know why it's going on, to know what the causes are, to know what Spain is really like, etc., etc., etc. My question is it, considering to translate a sentence that has been in campaign by at least one of our politicians, which is, we are in a hurry. Is it really that important to convince public opinion? I'm not saying that it's bad to do so, but should that be one of the main aims, or should we be aiming at convincing politicians, high-level politicians, who after all will be the ones who will be deciding whether to recognise us or not once independent? And depending on the answer to that, should it be the politicians, how much difficulty will we have considering that the EU is made up of a whole bunch of countries who are really relatively young and who, in a number of cases, are still battling to get their own cohesion and are very unwilling to sort of let go, to be ready to accept one of them sort of falling to pieces. And my last question...
You're just reminding me of the November 9th consultation question. You know, like, just in case you think yes, just in case you say no.
Well,
but yeah, okay.
I just want to get the
just throw it on.
Last question. Could you evaluate or give an opinion, or do you have an opinion, and is it as positive an opinion as mine is, regarding what's happened in Belgium with the free trade deal with Canada?
Who wants to take on the whole three questions? So, first question is, should we talk to the people or to the elites? And second, to whom in these elites exactly? So you take on the first one.
So, in general, well, particularly to me, in my work, I'm not a politician, so. And as a regular individual and as a member of the Assemblea, we have tried to focus particularly on civil movements, and so we've focused on giving information to whoever wanted to listen to it. And I think that that's a good strategy. Also, trying to appear in media and trying to talk to journalists, et cetera, et cetera. But there certainly are initiatives, both from Diplocat, which is a public-private consortium, and the government itself to talk to people. So my answer is kind of both. I think it's really important to educate as much as we can people in other countries about what's going on here. And I also think it's really important for politicians to realize that this is a democratic process, and that the question that I have gotten asked most from politicians in other countries is, isn't there some solution? Is there something that Spain could offer that would make you want to stay? And so to be able to explain, no, there's not, I think is really important. But I don't know that we need to do that I don't have a position where I can do that directly. So. But I think it's really important to also educate people, because they are the ones who will relate that narrative to their political representatives.
I definitely agree that this dissemination or explanation has to be on all levels, and everybody can actually participate. It doesn't have to be only a certain organization. It can be everybody, even traveling with family, with friends, with work colleagues. So it's something that actually is in motion, that is happening, but it could happen much more. And it's true as well, on the government level, there is already a focus to speak with different governments, to inform about the situation. The Full de Ruta, the roadmap, has been explained to the different embassies or different consulates. So there is already an open door to dialogue, to be always demonstrating that there will be the maximum guarantee of legality during the transition, trying to precisely calm down, work against this kind of public opinion that we read in the press, that as well we have to take into account, like we said before, press is one thing, and the other thing is what people really think, and later what politicians think, and what experts think, and this is all connected. Politicians read information from the experts, and if experts are more informed, they inform better the politicians, and so as well, the press is not the only source for everyone, and it's not necessarily the only decisive thing. But of course, journalists are very important, and as well, they have to be talked to and informed. And there's one part that seems important, not only to talk to politicians, but also to the lobbies, interest groups, especially economic interest groups. I remember, just as an anecdote, to have been in one of those meetings that one of those very important lobbies came from a very influential country in the European Union to inform themselves. And of course they were full of doubts, and they were saying, well, but then what are you going to do if this happens, and if the Spanish government does this, and this, and then we're going to have problems. And then the other person on the other side, I thought it was quite interesting that he said, don't worry, you will be the one who will make sure that this is not going to happen. You will be the one who will work in your interest, and you will make sure that we're not going to get that far. You will be the one who will make sure that there will be negotiations. Because in the end, money makes the world go round. And so this is one important part that we should take into consideration. And only as a note, there are almost 50% of the German companies in Spain are located in Catalonia. So.
Anna, last.
Yeah, I think you were saying where should we start, and I think you've actually forgotten, I think the most important thing is that we actually have to convince a whole load of people in Catalonia of independence. So I think that's the first thing, and I think that's the most important thing. And part of doing that is also convincing them not to fear for the future. And so part of that also then feeds into what you have to achieve abroad and the kind of discourse that you have to give out there, so that then the confirmation comes back, so that it's not a fear campaign that can be whipped up, and that there's not an answer to what the international community says, or whatever the statements are, whether it was former Barroso statements or whatever. So, and I think another important thing is that, and I think the government has been doing a lot on this, the Catalan government in the recent months, is to start behaving as a state, so that you actually take initiative and you have a response. And I think what is lacking in this part that I, and as a lawyer, see is the response in a legal way, and to raise the profile in a legal way of all the issues, of all the prosecutions that we now have that are taking place, and that will actually increase in time, as we can see. And there will be many other things that will be thought of on the Spanish side, and I think it's not enough to say they're fighting the Catalan issue with legal means. Of course, that's what a state does. But you also then fight with legal means yourself. And there are legal means out there, and to the extent that you can show that they're ineffective, well, then that's part of your legitimization of the need of a democratic process and the need of a referendum. So it all goes together. So I would suggest that we need a much stronger legal discourse that is put out there, that reveals all the things that we were talking about in terms of what's happened with the constitutions, what's happening now with the actions being taken, and what may happen going forward. And that will, I think, help the whole thing.
Right, so we're just taking one more question in public. All right.
Oh, sorry, we didn't do the Belgian question. We've just been told.
Ah, yes, the Belgian question.
Okay, so just briefly on that. So, does everybody know what happened with the Walloons and stuff? So the Walloons have voted not to support the signing of the free trade agreement between the European Union and Canada.
Stop using the word free trade for that, just call it what it's called.
Sorry, what is it called?
CETA.
Okay.
Free trade is not what it's about.
Okay, all right, CETA. I don't think that's...
It's general economic...
Yes, and it has an aspect of free trade, investment, etc., and a whole load of other things. But anyway, the point is, the question was, how do we perceive that? I think it's my perception of it is that it confirms my conviction that it's about the lack of a democratic deficit. You know, these things are driven by other interests. They may be good or may be bad, you can have a view on that, but the point is that there's no consultation and there's no understanding of what these agreements are meant to be about, and there's a lot of suspicion, rightly so, particularly because they've been negotiated in a completely intransparent way as to what they are about. And I was speaking at a conference just last Friday to a whole load of business people that Marty kindly organised for me to do, and the argument, particularly on TTIP, which is the EU-US agreement that is being negotiated, and this gentleman said that free trade agreements benefit all, and that the business community has simply failed to explain that they benefit all. And I said, that's not true, because if they had benefited all, we wouldn't have had a rise of inequality over the last 40 years. And so I think that's really what this is about. And so I think what is happening is, and I see Brexit in exactly the same way. It is about disenfranchisement of peoples, and so yes, I see it in a positive way. That it maybe will allow us to reshape the future in a pacific way, just like the Catalans are trying to do, rather than resorting to other more violent means. So I'm hopeful for the future precisely for that reason. Yeah.
So yeah, last question, and then we go for the viewers. And the Conquêtas and the
I come from Canada, but I'm a Québécois, l'allié du peuple catalan, very proud to support this drive towards independence for Catalonia. And if you want to comment on that agreement.
Oh, I can't. I don't have any information.
Well, I just think this Ministre Président of the Walloon is a very courageous man. He's been under so much pressure in the past days and weeks, and he's just resisting on the basis of transparency. This negotiation was secret from the beginning to the end, and now they're trying to put so much pressure on that man who has just required some transparency, this dispute settlement mechanism that makes no sense because it never made any sense. It's giving a lot of power to multinationals. So, but I have a question for you, and then before a comment. I think Catalonia has done pretty well on the international scene in the past, let's say 10 years, 6 years, since 2010, since that decision of the sentence of the court, because Catalonia comes out as a nation that is driving its independence movement with people, with Pacific people that are peaceful, and streets, and millions of them. And even in Canada, there's a very great deal of difficulty for those who oppose independence of Quebec to say anything wrong or negative about Catalonia, because there's this more than an impression that it's driven so much by the people, by grassroots, by democracy. What we see, the pictures, the aerial pictures, is very, very positive. And I think that is something you've achieved, and you should be very proud of that, of having achieved that. And so I think what, on the international plane, you need to do is just continue that, because that's how you get support. And that's how even leaders will come to say, well, you know, this is something really, really positive, and that's how it should be done, even here in Quebec or in Scotland or anywhere. But I think it's very important to convince the people of Catalonia. And my question to you, and maybe in light of what happened in Scotland in the past years, is do you have to be positive about independence? Because I think that was the approach of the Scots. You know, they have a long quarrel with history and with devolution, losing their parliament. You probably have much more historical grievances towards Spain. But what should the emphasis be about when you want to convince people? Is it historical misdoings of Spain, and that's why, you know, there's a good reason to become independent? Or is it more or only the positive aspects of what independence will bring to the Catalonia? So my question is for the three panelists.
So who wants to answer this?
Well, there's one thing that is important, and well, I speak as a German, and I have lived here for a long time, and what I can see that is quite different with this movement and makes it very makes so many people from so different ideologies participate is that it's a project. Because independence itself is not the objective. The objective is a common project, a new state, a better state with more equality, oriented towards Europe, open to immigration. So it's something that allows, like I said, people from all kinds of different backgrounds, even regions, that they want to participate because they see that there is a very concrete future that can be achieved. Because this as well is a knocking point that I have seen in my interviews with Catalan people who even some have been independentists for their whole life, some have later become independentists, and many of them say that it was even the realization that independence could be possible. That was very important, and at the same time that it was connected with something concrete, with a concrete project for a better state. And compare this to the situation in Spain right now. Almost 300,000 people leave every year the country to other horizons because they don't have any perspective for the future. The project of Catalonia is very interesting, and even the way it's done pacifically and democratically, this is the strength. This is its strength. And this is precisely as well what many experts point out, which will be the issue for the European Union. How do you react to such a democratic and pacific movement? Are you going to wait? What are you going to do? Is it necessary that there's going to be violence? Or are you going to show that your values, you share the same values of democracy and of freedom and of peace? They will have to. They will not be able to ignore it forever. So altogether, these two aspects, I think that they make independence. To look at independence in a positive way, talking about the project. So when we talk about explaining how Spain is, I think this is something for the exterior to understand the motivation, where it comes from, or the situation with Catalonia. But to convince people here, I think it's interesting to talk about the project. And I think this is more or less what the Asamblea as well is doing. Right, Liz?
Absolutely. So, well, yeah, leave it here for now. There's croquetas and bravas and beer upstairs.